Good morning, councillors, members of the public. We're going to get underway. We're going to open the council meeting on the 1st of November 2017 and we'll adjourn, and I'll hand over to Councillor Pannett as Chair of City Strategy Committee. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Yes, we've now adjourned the meeting.
Thank you, Mayor Lester, and welcome to this morning's City Strategy Committee. Particularly warm welcome to members of the public and students from Fisherea. I hope that we will give you good material this morning. So, toitu te maraea tane, toitu te maraea tangaroa, toitu te iwi, tau, poneki, kia kakama, kia maia, nai tato o poneki, me noho, ngā tahi, vai te aretika. And let us practice those words today. So we need you to let us know if you're going to leave the meeting, and we will have morning tea at 10:30 sharp. So we've got no apologies, conflict of interest declarations. Any to declare? Oh, okay, thank you. Can we just actually move? I'll move and second Councillor Wolfe, Councillor Calvert's apologies, thank you. No conflict of interest declarations, thank you. Now we've just got the minutes, and they need to be amended again from the 27th of September, so I'm just going to explain why. First of all, I wasn't entirely comfortable with secretarial notes under Councillor Foster's amendments. I didn't feel they were necessary. The matters about whether they were necessary or not were dealt with in the meeting. And also there was a division called on the paper that's not recorded in the minutes. So I'm just going to move those to amendments. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Wolfe. Is there any debate on those amendments? So generally we don't do such a thing. You can just take a minute to have a look at it. Is that all right? Okay, any debate? Right, all those in favour, say aye. Aye. Against? Carried, thank you. Right, and now we have public participation. Now, as you know, councillors, we're not allowed to repeat material that may have already been articulated in submissions, but I do feel there are in particular two public submitters who will add to our debate today. So we're going to welcome, first of all, Mr McGuinness from Willis Bond and Mr Athfield from Athfield Architects. Anyone else? And talk to your proposal. So if you'd like to come to the front, a warm welcome to you. We look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Madam Chair, they were going to be part of my presentation, so after I present on the results of the public consultation, they were going to follow through, and then we were going to face any questions after that.
Okay, well this is a meeting. We don't have presentations, as you know, Mr Faherty. No, I think... okay, look, can you do your presentation now as part of public participation, Mr Faherty? Just because this isn't normal, we do go... we are going to go into... Oh, actually... How long is your presentation?
5 or 6 minutes.
All right, look, what we're going to do things in a slightly different order, so sorry, I just would have appreciated if you'd let me know, is we will have your presentation, public participation, and then we'll have questions afterwards, if that's all right with people, because just then you've got as much information as possible, because we are allowed to ask questions of the paper today. So, would you like to come up and do your presentation now? Bring up Mr McGuinness, Mr Athfield.
morning, Madam Chair, Mr Mayor and councillors. The City Strategy Committee members will recall I presented the Willis Bond proposal on Site 9 at North Kumitoto on the waterfront to the CSC meeting on the 22nd of June. I presented at that time the overall proposal, including details of the preliminary concept design and the main commercial and legal terms of the development agreement and proposed ground lease. The CSC agreed with my assessment of the significance of the proposed decision and resolved to proceed to public consultation. Public consultation was conducted over the period 3rd to the 28th of July this year, and 128 responses were received. Consultation was facilitated by the City Shaper team with input from Democracy Services, Creative Services, the Digital Services team and the IT team. I'm here this morning to present the results of the public consultation. I'm accompanied by Willis Bond and Athfield Architects to speak in a little more detail on the proposal and their design response to the feedback that was received from public consultation. Following this, I would be happy to take questions. Today, Council's approval to the development proposal was sought. I will present the legal and commercial terms in the publicly excluded part of Council's meeting today. So the scope of the consultation. As previously mentioned, the public consultation ran from the 3rd to the 28th of July. It comprised an on-site information kiosk, a converted and specially branded shipping container placed in a prominent position adjacent to Site 9. Wellington City Council website entitled Have Your Say. We also went out via print media and advertorial in a prominent position in the Dominion Post newspaper, social media, Twitter and the Council Facebook page. Hard copy submission forms were left at the City Council reception area and the main public library. We also had a series of stakeholder meetings, 10 in all, 3 with iwi groups, Waterfront Watch, Inner City Wellington and the Wellington Civic Trust, as well as 4 adjacent property owners. There were 5 questions in all, so the first one there in front of you, what is your level of support for the proposed building on Site 9? 127 responses. Of that, 53% were supportive, 37% non-supportive, and 10% either neutral or did not respond. From my perspective, it was a pleasing outcome, given supporters are generally less motivated to participate in such processes than non-supporters. Question 2 is in front of you there. We then sought reasons for supporting or not supporting the proposal. Interestingly, there were 140 responses from those supporting the proposal, with 81 responses from those not supporting the proposal. The 2 main reasons given by the 140 respondees for supporting the proposal were the proposed use of the building and the perceived enhanced vibrancy and vitality a building would bring to the area. The 2 main reasons given by 81 respondees for not supporting the proposal were the site should be open space or some other public use, and the bulk and scale of the building. Of the 127 responses to the question of support or otherwise for the design of the proposed building, some 51% were supportive, 29% were not supportive, and 20% either neutral or did not respond. In response to question 4, what improvements or change could be suggested for the design of the proposed building, there are only 41 responses, with the 2 most commonly suggested changes or improvements being reduce the bulk and scale of the building and the building design could be improved. The 5th question was more of an open one. 63 respondents provided other comments. In many instances, respondents used this section to amplify or justify feedback provided elsewhere in the submission forms, both in support and in opposition. Given other matters were wide-ranging, a more qualitative approach was taken, hence no graphic illustration here. The following key themes were distilled from that feedback. Building bulk and scale, and more particularly impact on public and private views, potential shading effects, potential impacts on historic heritage, potential impact of wind and building height exceeded parameters expressed in an earlier Environment Court decision. Use of the building, a few respondents suggested the building have more public focused uses such as a cinema or housing. Commercial, some noted and supported the development of buildings on the waterfront, which helped fund development of open space improvements. Some suggested the site be kept as open space, with 2 respondents suggesting the site be developed as a Chinese garden. The outcome of the oral hearings at the CSC meetings on the 17th and 24th of August are outlined and detailed in the consultation report attached to my paper, but in overall terms, the 15 oral submitters spoke to the content of their submissions. So without further ado, I'll now hand over to Willis Bond and Athfield Architects to run through the design, or more particularly the architectural response to the public consultation and feedback.
Thanks, Mike, and good morning, Mayor Lester and councillors. Thanks for having us here. I'll be very brief, rest assured. John Hardwick-Smith here is going to talk briefly about the design itself, but I just wanted to make a few points about the context of this development. Going back to 2013, the team was awarded the rights to develop both sites 9 and 10 as part of a contested process. The design was always prepared on an integrated basis with site 8 in mind as well. So obviously sites 8 and 10 are underway and are going to look great, but site 9 has always been the final piece of that jigsaw puzzle, and we're really confident that it's a building that will fit very nicely in that group, which has now become a bit of a commercial hub in Wellington, especially with the new 20 Custom House Key building across the road. I'll just list some of the tenants that have come in to both those new buildings, including PwC Centre, PwC, FMG, Co-op Bank, Medical Assurance Society, Deloitte, NZI and Kiwi Bank. And they're all big corporate tenants that have been attracted to this area, not just because of great buildings and a great location, but actually because of the resilient nature of them. They're both base isolated, and so will Site 9 be. And we really see it as being, well, it already is, but a really strong commercial hub of New Zealand, of Wellington, that's got, as I say, strong resilient buildings within it. Our preferred use is a corporate office for the reasons I've just outlined, although we have agreed with Wellington City that if the market did change, there's opportunities for boutique accommodation down the line. We're really pleased with the outcome of the public consultation. There were more submissions than there were on Site 10, which is a far bigger building. We've obviously taken the feedback, made the changes, particularly around the height, to the extent that we can, and hopefully that will allay many people's concerns around the sense of bulk. But we would add that the building itself is still lower than most of the Meridian building roofline, and we think will sit very nicely in that whole campus environment, including the old heritage buildings. John might be able to talk more to that, but thanks for the opportunity and thanks for your support.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Mayor Lester, councillors and everybody. I'm John Hardwick-Smith from Athfields, and Andre Bishop is here with me. So we'll talk briefly about where the design is at. Now there's 2 parts to this. One is just to briefly explain the context, and that's really to clarify the context upon which changes have been made in response to the consultation. So just starting off, once again, setting or identifying the building in its historical context in those string of buildings along that existed between the quays and the harbour front. The yellow outline is where the site is. That's where a former building we've referred to as the brick store was. You can see the images on the right That's the building that was formerly on the site that we are now on, just north of Shed 13, and just south of what was the custom building, which is now Whitmore Plaza. And here's the contemporary context for that site. So the Site 9 building here, and that's where it sits as a complementary partner across from Site 10 that David mentioned, that's under construction now, sitting on the site of where the old brick store building was, and extending, I guess, from the line of the sheds, and in conjunction with the Meridian building, which is there, forming a backdrop to the landscape to Site 8 in that context. Just once again, to set the context from which changes have been made, the building Site 9 was designed or established as a building of two parts. One part is the lower part that faces the waterfront, and generally that's lower in terms of stepping up from the waterfront in the foreground here, Site 8, up towards the city, and it also steps down the building from Site 10, Shed 21 along here, down towards the sheds through here. So those two parts are, and I guess the stepping for the design has always been in those two directions. It stepped down from north to south, but also stepped down from city to sea. So those two components kind of work together to make the building form. So those yellow bits are really marking the lower bits, which, as you see, wrap. And I guess there's a sense that lower bit there has got a relationship to the public portico that will be developed in Site 10. So there's a sense of that complementary gateway, but also has a relationship to the sheds through here and the Meridian building that surround the Kumatoto Park. So there's a more textured frontage to that part of the building. The taller bits, like that, is part of that stepping down from Site 10 to this site, to the sheds, to the yellow. And that part also is responding, I guess, to the relationship across the road, the keys to the city, and to the blue part of Site 10. So those are the two parts, if you like, which make up the design for the building, and they combine to make one site as a backdrop to that landscape. That's the floor plan, the ground floor plan, which indicates the landscape. Whitmore Plaza, which is where the custom building used to be, and as it was historically, the gaps between the buildings respond to where the streets come through from the city to the open space. And the footprint, you can see here, that's Site 10 being built now. And Site 9 there, the yellow bits are the interactive tenancy components on the ground floor. You can see the core there, so the entry really is from front door to the waterfront, but also access from the quays. And you can see in the next slide is that's the upper parts of the building, and it indicates the yellow components here are now the sheltered access ways that happen along the ground level, where there are components of building over the top of that ground footprint. So you can see it's plotted Site 9 through here, and for reference it also shows Site 10 and Meridian, and that's partly in response to the Waterfront Framework's objective of providing sheltered ways from the railway station right along both the quay side and the waterfront side of these developments. Just other things on here too, which these are the gateways that come from those streets, the blue set out points. You can see the view shaft, which is that line through there. So Site 9 sits clear of the view shaft from Whitmore and clear of the view shaft from Taylor. So in some ways that's what sets out its length. And there's been a minor change to just ensure that previously this end was encroaching slightly, but now that's been pulled back to comply with that view shaft. And once again, the elevation from the waterfront, and this elevates the waterfront component here, which extends from, like we said, the sense of coming from that portico on Site 10 and relating to the podium scale buildings through here, Meridian dotted, the sheds dotted, going through here. And we've also outlined on there the heights that indicated in the Environment Court ruling, which is 19 metres at the north end and 16 metres at the south end. And that's showing that the front bit is more or less in compliance with this lower level as it steps down, and the back bit, which extends a bit to the north, there's a relationship to the 19 metres. And just a reminder that those heights are above mean sea level, they're not above ground, so the ground level is actually already at 2.5. So the real heights there are those figures, if you like, minus the 2.5 from the ground level at that point. So in terms of the changes, do you want to talk through this?
Yep.
Yeah.
So in terms of the changes from the public consultation, generally the overall bulk and form has been reduced. So overall height has come down, and as John described, the north and south ends have been pulled in to avoid that encroachment into the view shafts both down Waring Taylor and Whitmore Plaza. The plant room up on the roof there has been reduced in scale. Essentially the plant room now just consists of the lift overrun, and there'll be additional plant just sitting on the eastern side of the lift overrun.
Speak a little louder.
Sure.
Just closer to the
Yeah.
front.
In terms of additional changes, on the top floor at the south end, the scheme presented during the public consultation extended all the way south to the southern elevation, and so that has been extended further north, so essentially at one structural bay for the taller glassy component. And then we're looking at the city elevation, the west elevation, so when viewed from Custom House Quay, and we see that stepping up from shed 13 through to site 9, and then through to site 10. And so in terms of those, where the buildings been revised from that public consultation scheme, at the north end, the roof has come down, and it's a combination of floor-to-floor heights and the ground floor height being reduced. And we can see here at the south end where the level 4 has been pushed further north to really address that sort of condition across the Waring Taylor Street gates and that relationship with shed 13. So we've got 4 views here of the building. So this is from Whitmore Street looking south, and looking at the 4-storey component that is addressing that Whitmore Street gateway and celebrating that with its relationship across to the Site 10 building. And then extending further down to the south, we see the waterfront component wrapping around and giving some continuation of that waterfront elevation, having some presence on the south and the west elevations. So this is a view looking north up Custom House Quay with 20 Custom House Quay on the left, shed 13 on the right, and a demonstration of that scale relationship. So essentially a similar height and scale to shed 13, and then stepping up further to the north. And wrapping around to the waterfront side, again seeing shed 13 to the south, both the scale and texture of shed 13 being referenced in the facade treatment for Site 9, as well as responding to the warmth and texture of the Site 8 landscape, and also a relationship across Whitmore Plaza to the undercroft of Site 10. And then the celebrated north elevation where the water is sort of at its narrowest point along Kumitoto Lane, and the expression of those two components, both the waterfront side and the city side. And yeah, that's our presentation.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Calvi-Freeman.
Two questions, please. You're proposing that the development be commercial rather than residential. There was a comment that if circumstances changed, it could be converted to boutique accommodation. Is there any possibility of a combined development, for example, the bottom 2 or 3 floors are commercial and the top couple of floors of residential or boutique accommodation?
That's a good idea, but unfortunately the building is not quite big enough. We have looked at that, but it's got quite a small footprint. So to have 2 uses in a building that size is quite difficult because of the you need 2 lobbies,
And one more regarding the height. We're down admirably on what was there previously, but we're still about 5% above the 16 and 19 above average mean sea level. I presume coming into those height planes would cost you a whole floor. Is that correct? Is there any other way you can reduce that 5% of excess height to those levels, and why not?
The work we have done to do that is to look very carefully at the interfloors, and I guess it's a balance of amenity on those floors, right from ground through each floor. So we've looked very carefully, considering the building width, to get those interfloors working, to get the balance of the height, being as low as it can. And I think, and we also pulled back, as Andre was saying, the extent of the higher level. So the amount of mass, if you like, into that higher zone has been reduced. But to increase the, to decrease the height of the taller component anymore probably would mean taking a floor off.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Foster.
Yeah, look, thanks for that. Two areas of questions and process in terms of the TAG report, which obviously you've read. Yeah. So the first question of those is just following up from Chris's question, the facade treatment. So what they're saying here is that the building's now clearly a commercial proposal, and the facade would need to be significantly altered to be an appropriate residential proposition. So while you've talked about the potential for changing use, TAG's obviously saying question mark, can you actually do it with the design as it is? So interested in your response to that.
The way we've approached this is to look at the building, and I think those two parts, we've talked the kind of metaphors there, if you like, is the lower, more textured part is a bit like the reference to containers stacked on the waterfront, whereas the taller part's a bit like the crane, if you like. And we think that's a design framework that could house either. It could house housing in terms of the modulation that the kind of textured facade allows for, but it could also house workplace because some of that textured facade is useful in terms of solar moderation. And
so you don't agree with that comment that's been made by TAG?
Well, we think it's an important issue, and it's a good question that they've raised, but we have, in the design approach, we think the framework could cope with either.
Okay, cool. And the second question, can you go to one of the slides, which is the southern end of the building, because you've obviously made some changes, and again they've made a comment about that, which says it's, what do they describe it as, a relatively blunt end to towards that shed 13, and the previous proposal gave a better formal and scale relationship to shed 13 than is now proposed. And I understand there's some ongoing discussion between you guys and TAG about resolving that issue. Could you just speak to that just a little bit, please?
Well, the change, and it's an interesting issue really. The change that has been made in order to get some more step down at this south end has been to shift whereas during consultation and previously, the two sides of the building were more clearly just one side, if you like, being more of the taller component, and the waterfront side being more of the lower component. Now, what the change has done is to wrap round the south end more of the waterfront component, and that's the brown textured bit, if you like.
Yeah.
So there's a sense, if you like, of the two components wrapping around each other in a slightly different way. Now we think that approach is a totally valid approach, and it's one that we are in discussion with TAG about the detail of that. My understanding is their response was, in saying that it may have been a less clear formal response, was that from the quay side there are more components, so it's a bit messier, if you like. But my understanding is that it's still a matter of how one articulates those two forms wrapping around each other.
I would have thought that was a plus to break down the facade of the building from the quay side. But
that's right.
So anyway, in terms of process, there's ongoing conversation,
yes.
And the proposal is that we will include that, the recognition that ongoing conversation is happening in the resolution.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Gilbert.
Thank you, Chair. I did have a question about the technical advisory group, but that's been answered. Thank you. I just want to ask about bird strike and whether you take into account bird life hitting buildings and perhaps where there's see-through components in buildings, and I wonder if that's one of the parameters you take into account when designing buildings.
Actually, it's interesting. It is. I mean, with highly glazed facades, there are there are issues, and obviously there are issues of transparency and outlook and view, which is why they're called for, particularly in work environments, and given this context particularly. But they do need to obviously address the things such as solar gains. So therefore there are aspects on the outside that are like the louvering systems or glass treatments that deal with that. And also it's acknowledging that while glass is transparent, it does have sheen or reflection and so on. So there are different tones of glass reflection, and there obviously needs to be a means of maintaining and accessing the glass. So in that may not be a direct answer, but it is saying that in dealing with facades there are a number of issues, and partly, like I said, about actually what glass means in terms of its transparency or reflection, and partly just the ability to maintain and service a facade like that.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a question around public space and the public interface. I understand the ground floor is predominantly retail and hospitality, but is there access to the rooftop, and what is planned for that area?
The setback on the roof provides a terrace that's accessible to the users of that floor, but it's not currently proposed that it's for as part of a public space access. And once again, that's an issue that's been traversed on this project and others I know on the waterfront. And this, it's often the issue around roof access for public access is quite complex. This is a relatively small building, and as David was saying before, that to get access to work on the roof, it needs to have high profile. It needs to have separate access managed from tenancies in it. These footprints are relatively small, and in terms of putting multiple lifts in them, it's tricky in terms of that working, and it does need to also be have a reasonable level of profile and of activity, if you like, on the roof that justifies it and makes it work. And all those things, the size of this, are playing against it possibly even harder than they might in some of the other waterfront developments, where the issue's also been questioned or raised.
Thanks.
Thank you. Mayor Lester.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of questions. Just when we talked through, you mentioned earlier 2013 this process kicked off. Can you just talk us through, David, from your perspective as a developer, how that's played out, given your own experience here and up in Auckland as well?
Sure. More in terms of the time frame or the process?
I mean, I was there, I think, when you gave the first presentation on both Site 9 and 10 as part of Wellington Waterfront Limited. So just in terms of, councillors, some of them are new, 5 of us are new here in this format. And it's just the background to it, the context, how much does it cost to bring it to this point in broad terms? Look, we're talking about a 4-year process with a lot of uncertainty. And just how, on an emotional level, professional level, how does it play out for you?
How long have you got? But no, 4 years probably. No, it's listen, it's been dreadfully painful, but no, it's been a good process. The things we liked about it were that it was master planned from the start. There'd obviously been some hiccups with these sites in the old days, if I can say that, about 2010, with the Environment Court. So the process we were engaged in was very clear. We prefer to come into a process where there's quite a clear plan around the design and the heights, although there was some risk that we had to take on board. So that was good. We, as a developer, like the ability to have something of scale rather than small piecemeal sites, so that if a project goes well, you can keep going with it and develop an area rather than just do it once and then have to move on. Choose Lane is a good example where you had a big site and you could basically evolve it as demand came in. So I think this is probably quite a good example where when we started, Site 10 was always an office building. We weren't quite sure what Site 9 was, but the world's changed since then with earthquakes and things, and Site 9 now is a commercial zone in our view, with especially the stuff across the road. So I guess that time frame has actually been quite a good thing, so that we weren't forced to do everything on day one. And I guess that's another thing that we obviously discussed with Mike and Ian and Kevin and the team that flexibility in these arrangements is really key and helpful, because it sounds convenient to us, but the market does change a lot. So it was like with Clyde Key that if we were bound into very strict timeframes and rules and uses, we would have tripped over very early. But these processes, which give a bit of flexibility and time, actually work in everybody's favour, so long as everybody's obviously committed. And the moment we start spending money on the Environment Court, we are so. Once you're in there, there's no turning back. But I'd just like to say full credit to Mike and Ian and co, because they've been great to work with. It's not always easy, these things. We have arguments along the way. The contamination thing's been quite an issue on Site 10 that we were disappointed with, but we just sort of get on with it and move on. So it's been a great approach, and everybody gets to have their say, and we're all still friends really, and working well together. So we're really pleased with that.
And just a broad sense of costs. I mean, if you don't want to say it, feel free. But I mean, are we talking hundreds of thousands of dollars investments to get to this point in time?
Oh yeah, I mean the site. It's no public secret, but the Site 10 resource consent to get the Environment Court and achieve the consent was, I think, was about $1.5 million. To get this one for Site 9, which is around 600,000 or 700,000, we think. Could be worse if the Environment Court is difficult or the objectives are difficult. It could be $1 million. So for a site this size, that's quite tricky. But they're big investments, and when there's risk, there's pressure on. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Councillor Free.
Thank you. Look, I've just got a question. When I noticed how much glass there was on the north face, and I know there's an answer to this, without getting too technical, what measures have you taken to earthquake strengthen and make sure the glass, doesn't become a hazard?
The building is proposed to be base isolated. And it's an interesting base isolation in terms of it's happening at the between the top of ground and level 1. So that immediately means the movement is moderated significantly in terms of the upper building. And the upper building is a frame that's well braced. So in terms of it's a reasonably solid unit. So things like glass on the outside is in a much better position on a building like this than one that isn't base isolated. And nowadays, any panel, including glass, is secured in a manner that deals with its movement within its frame. So it's dealt with in terms of being safe and resilient.
I've just got one other question. What will you see when you're looking down on the top of the building? You mentioned a lift, the top of the lift well, but will there be other, aircon units, or what are you going to see when you're in an office on the other side looking down on the top?
No, we've done some work on that. Andre, do you want to detail?
So there's two bits of plant that will sit up on the roof and on the waterfront side of the lift overrun, and that will be the air handling unit, so providing all the fresh air, and the heat recovery unit, which is attached to that, and then there will also be an exterior chiller that sits alongside that.
And I presume it's going to look, reasonably tidy.
That's right.
So,
yep.
Okay, because there will be a lot of people looking down on it. That's just my only thought there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Day.
So my question sort of follows on from that a little bit. Obviously, open space is really important to the community in this area, and I believe that actually the open space has been well allocated. But have you considered, as part of a development like this, having green walls? Because that does create sort of a feeling more of open space in the natural environment.
We have considered actually that there are various things that have been part of the palette of materials that have gone through. What we have got on the ground floor, the low level on this side, for example, is the brick facade, and that's partly the reference to the sheds. So there's a sense of those kind of solid bases going through. One aspect about green walls, it is quite an exposed environment down here. On both sides actually there are it is quite an exposed environment in terms of salt and wind and so on. Which is a factor in terms of making green walls work. It's not to say they can't work, but it's a factor in how they work. But I'd say generally we haven't currently got that, and that's partly just looking at the mix of what we're tying into existing structures, and the practicalities of those upper level structures being, pretty durable and tough and working for the activities they provide for.
Thank you. Councillor Calvert.
Just a couple of questions. Just looking at this picture, is part of the building overhanging on the footpath? The glass side, is that overhanging over the footpath, or?
It is, and what I might, if I can just go back to it is that the upper part of the building does overhang the lower level footprint as part of the objective of providing those sheltered ways. And the extent of that, I mean, there's a plan here that shows that there. So for example, the strong yellow colour is where the building overhangs, where there are walkways, as provided as a sheltered walkway at the base of the building.
Okay, so that, I mean, is that a walkway or a footpath? Is that?
Oh, sorry. In terms of its status, we're doing. Yeah.
I can clarify that. The yellow area on the ground floor is all within the boundaries of the site. So,
Okay.
in other words, the extremities of the upper floors go out to the boundary, and then on the ground floor, it's cut back to provide the amenity of a covered walkway area within the boundaries of the site.
Okay, thank you. And I've got a question about the public consultation, and it was good to see that we had more than we did for site 10. I wondered whether we may have had more from this one, because people have actually seen what the impact of site 10 has been now that they've seen it going up.
So sorry, I didn't quite follow the question. Could we have done more in terms of public consultation?
No. I'm just wondering whether we've had more, because you said we've had more people commenting this time around than on site 10, and I'm just wondering whether we've had more people commenting this time around because they've seen the impact of site 10.
I think our public consultation process this time was perhaps just a little more robust than last time, and that probably explains why there was more interest in it.
And would you, if we'd actually had disclosed the high-level commercial terms for this, do you think that would have impacted, and how would have it impacted on the public consultation?
I don't believe it would have adversely impacted on the outcome or the consultation. We believe it's a very good market-related deal, and generally. Within the property world and business generally, the commercial terms of a deal are never really announced, if ever announced, until settlement of a transaction has actually taken place. And this has still got some way to go to get to that point.
It seems very similar to Shelley Bay to me, but anyway.
Thank you. Any further questions? I've got a couple. Mr McGuinness, for you. And we've just heard that the terms will be released finally. So you are comfortable with that, just so that the public knows what the city is contributing to this development?
Well, we're actually not up to speed with that in terms of you mean the commercial terms?
Yes. Just, and of course, I'm not interested in what you're doing. It's what the city's contributing, and that's transparent.
So, following earlier discussions, I think. The last time the CSC met, it was agreed that the commercial terms would be released after the deal went unconditional, so after the Environment Court hearing, resource consent hearing was over. So that would still be before settlement, I suppose. So a little earlier than normal, but a little further on from here.
Okay, so you're comfortable with that, Mr McGuinness? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
great. Great. Now, just two other small questions. You're the expert in this area. The site does seem quite small, but you still believe it's viable?
Yeah, but it's just big enough in terms of a commercial development. So we've had to spend a lot of time just finessing it and making sure it works. But it is viable.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just the last question, you said that there's no going back, once you go down the Environment Court route. We've had this experience a number of times where people thought they were going to get consent and then they didn't. Do you have any idea about alternatives for the site if the court decided otherwise? And that's enough, obviously.
Well, alternatives, I think the natural uses are the ones that we've identified, and if they, if the Environment Court said no, well, I think it would be back to the drawing board in terms of a use. I think it would be a more of a high quality shed type building that would be for some very public use, and therefore the site would have no value to the city in terms of commercial value. So I think if it was rejected, it becomes a different piece of land, really.
Okay. Right, any final questions? Thank you, gentlemen. That was really helpful. Appreciate that. Right, now we're going to go to public participation now, and hopefully that will be easier to do given the order we're taking it in. So, Mr. Davey, would you like to present first? And Mr. Davey has a handout from Waterfront Watch. Andy, could you just help with the microphone? Thank you.
Good morning. Just a couple of points before I start. Could I ask, when was this agenda and reports released for the public? How long ago, in other words?
Yes, it was. It was Thursday, the papers were released. So I'm just... Oh, sorry, it was Friday, Mr. Davey.
It was Friday
Last Friday.
Okay. Doesn't give a lot of time to try and get one's head around what's involved. Well, yes.
We are trying to improve that, but yes, it is tricky, right.
And I notice in the there are no images or drawings of the revised design plans in this document, just really in that document, which means anybody trying to make a advised decision on the changes involved, it's difficult without actual drawings and plans. Anyhow, I've looked through most of what I think is relevant, and I refer to. I'll refer throughout my talk this morning to pages within the document. First of all, page 7. Do you all have the hard copy?
Yes.
Okay. This states, item number 7 states that the main concerns in the opposing submissions was the building height exceeding the maximum of 16 and 19 metres, but no heights were mentioned of the proposed building in the public consultation material. So how were submitters to know of these? Do they look up the 2012 Environment Court decision? I think not. On page 7 again, item 8, I comment that the proposed building still exceeds the Environment Court ruling by half a metre on the south end and nearly a metre on the north end. I note that the plant room has been reduced from 2.8 metres to 1.3. Is this 1.5 reduction possible for such a vital function? Go please now to page 8. 10, it mentions about plans in the public consultation information. But yes. I didn't see any plans with what I was received to for the consultation process. The definition plan could mean, well, simply a very comprehensive presentation of what's going to be built, or just sketches. But yes. 14. The total number of written submissions received was 127, of which 53% were either supportive, etc. Were any submitters connected with the architect or the council? I would hope not, and I would trust that that wouldn't be the case. In other words, what I'm trying to suggest here is that, providing it's transparent, and because you have to be aware of that you have to satisfy yourselves that was the case. Page 9, Roman 2. The reduced heights still don't comply with the Environment Court ruling for Site 9. 22, item 22, on that, it mentions that the waterfront in Wellington needs more high quality and well-designed buildings. Surely the purpose for this proposed building needs to be made known. Perhaps another building on the wrong side of the city, and I put a question mark there because am I jumping ahead? Can you see? Okay. The commercial side should be on the west side of Custom House Quay. Page 10. I note that numbers 28, you're right. I note that numbers 28 to 32 all relate to the Council's opinions of the Environment Court rulings on height requirements for sites 9 and 10. Number 32, in particular, claims that the Site 10 building was allowed to be 26.25 metres above AMSL. Please be aware that the plant room referred to is a small area on the roof, comprising a height of nearly 4 metres. This results in the roof of the building on Site 10 only being a maximum height of 22.4, which is in accordance with the Environment Court's Variation 11 ruling. And item 35, Willis Bond hasn't decided what the proposed building will be used for. Surely this basic requirement should be revealed by now. We'll refer now to the TAG report, or TAG review of a revised design. Pages 13 and 14. Changes to the south end of the building. It is evident that TAG is unhappy with the changes made, as they've mentioned in 3, 4, 5 and 6. Appears there's still a long way to go with the design work. 7 in the TAG report, relation to view shafts. It is clear that the Warring-Taylor Street view shaft is of considerable concern. this needs to be clarified promptly in conjunction with the district plan. Otherwise, it's a guess-type mentality. 10, the roof line. TAG are critical of the elimination of the wing roof. The public consultation information was very vague in this respect, as the wing roof was poorly illustrated. It had the appearance of being a considerable number of photovoltaic panels. And item 11 of the TAG report, ground floor, it is stated that there is a 5-metre overhang to the north that provides for a sheltered, occupiable space to the north of the building. Hopefully, this is contained within the ground footprint of the building and not from overhang of the floors above. Any overhangs should not be permitted. And page 16, item 20, there's a brief mention of, this is the only reference about ground floor or basement parking. It's made just there. Is provision being made for parking on site? I don't think there is any. I'd ask you now to please refer to the attached photograph taken yesterday of a Site 10 development. This enormous office building should be completed and its effect on the waterfront environment assessed before any consideration on developing Site 9. Finally and importantly, there are many issues still to be resolved. Waterfront Watch recommends you should reject this proposal.
Thank you, Mr Davey. Any just very quick questions from anyone? No. Okay, you've been very clear. Thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you.
Mr Gibson, okay, he's not here. So we're going to now break for 15 minutes for morning tea, and then Councillor Foster will introduce the paper. Thanks very much, colleagues. Right, good morning again, councillors. I think we have got 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes, we've got more than 8. Okay, Councillor Foster, over to you. Yes, we keep to time in this committee. Thank you. Councillor Foster, we are waiting with bated breath. Oh, right. Right, well, I just like to keep to time, right? Because your words are so profound. Right, okay.
On that basis, Madam Chair, I move. Do you want me to leave it there?
You can do whatever you like, Councillor, as you well know.
Yeah, look, I know people are going to debate it, so let's talk about it properly. So first of all, I'm pleased to move this. It is, just for those of you who, now I'm the only survivor, the waterfront framework, it's utterly consistent with the waterfront framework. That area in North Kumatoto has always been an area which has been described as one where we were going to have buildings and squares. Also, and I'll pick up one of the questions that Diane asked, that the idea was also putting shelter along that along the side of the quays, and so having both a building there and also the overhang there to provide shelter for pedestrians going along that side of the quays has always also been part of the waterfront framework. So utterly consistent with that. And if I can also remind those of you who were here before the last election, and for information for those who were not, Councillor Calvi Freeman, those who were not, we also did a review of the waterfront framework because it's a fairly venerable document now, but we decided in the last term that it was fit for purpose and we would keep it and we wouldn't go back and sort of redo the whole job again. So the waterfront framework is still the guiding document, and this development is utterly consistent with that. There's been some comment about what is and isn't public. In fact, I read a very interesting article on Wellington Scoop this morning, which didn't look as though they'd actually had a look at the agenda at all, because it said that the whole thing is in public excluded. Including the consultation report back and everything. So I might go back and correct them a little bit, because clearly that is not the case. The only thing which is in public excluded at the moment, and we've had the agreement that will stop being in public excluded in time, are the commercial and legal terms. And that's because, if this did fall over through the consenting process, then clearly council would have to think again about what it does with the site. And it may well go to the market again and say, well, what's somebody else prepared to offer for it? So that is the only bit that is public excluded. The process has been lengthy, and the question that Justin helpfully asked sort of gave a bit of that. But that's only part of it. The process goes back a lot longer than that. So it's been a very lengthy, very open process. There's been design and commercial tendering processes around this. The consultation process you heard about this morning as well has been very open. Container on the wharf, there was written material on websites, social media, meetings with key stakeholders, and just one of the things that Waterfront Watch asked about was pictures. Well, if you go back to the consultation material, there are lots of pictures there. And it shows pictures, measurements, and the context as well. So all of that material was there. So I don't know what's going on in terms of people's recognition of what's there, and given that people made submissions on exactly that material, they seem to have forgotten it was there. And then, of course, there were oral hearings. Now, one of the things, of course, we do know, and often we get accused of not responding to public feedback, which I think is always untrue. But in this case, the majority of the submissions, and those submissions are submissions, it's not a survey, but the majority of submitters said, actually, we want you to go ahead with this, more than said we don't, and by some margin. So I think we should, if that's something that's material to you, I think that is something that should be borne in mind. Also, there has been a response to those submissions, because one of the key issues that submitters who had concerns about was size, bulk. And that's why we've had a redesign process to some degree, and the reduction, as you've seen this morning, in the height, to bring it much closer to the Environment Court, and I'll come back to the Environment Court shortly, but the Environment Court's suggestions, and also a removal of a small intrusion into one of the view shafts. So there's been a response to that. The response, of course, and you've read the TAG report, and when I'm moving this, I'm also moving those two new notes. Actually, those notes should be, if you lift them up, they should go above 4. So they'd be 4 and 5, and then, because the main resolution is the last one, which is the recommend to council. So it's clear, first of all, that the design's being refined. And secondly, because that design refinement's going ahead, TAG has said, oh, actually, we've got some issues around that. We want to work through those details. TAG's been a grouping that we've had looking at, various personnel, but looking at all that goes on the waterfront for probably 20 years, I would say. And I think it's important that we show respect to both the experts that we've got to do this work, and also the process, which again is part of the waterfront framework. So that's why I've recommended those two, and those words have been sorted by the officers, so they are comfortable with those. Final few things that I wanted to say. One of the issues for me was the use of the building, whether it's residential or commercial. I took comfort from the answers which we had this morning, so thank you for those, that it is adaptable. TAG obviously had some concerns about that, but it looks adaptable. And I guess while some people have said, oh, look, you don't know what's going to happen in the building, and surely that should be sorted out, the lease term is long enough that there's a very high chance that the use of the building might change over a period of time. What we do now in 50, 60, 70 years' time may well be different in that building. So if it allows for that, I think that is fine. And the final thing I wanted to finish off with was the variation 11, because essentially that sort of set people's thinking about the heights of the buildings. And I think some of the language in the variation is interesting because they're a bit loose with the use of the words maximum and permissible. They use permissible on site 10, maximum on site 9, and I'm not quite sure exactly what they mean. I think you'd need some interpretation there. But what the Environment Court did, which was, first of all, it said they struck down the variation, said, look, because we've got this 0 permissible level at the moment, so they struck down the variation because council was trying to say, what's the baseline going to be? It's going to be 30 metres, 20 metres, whatever it might be. So they struck that down. But what they did do is they said buildings were appropriate on the Site 10 site and on the Site 9 site. So anybody who says that buildings are not appropriate on the Site 9 site, the Environment Court said, yes, they are. And this is our suggested height. Now, of course, those of you who are very familiar with the Resource Management Act will know that you have a maximum permissible level. That means up to that level you don't even have to get resource consent, and above that then you have to get resource consent. So it doesn't mean that you can never go beyond it. It just means you've got to go through a consenting process. And they also said, of course, that Site 8 should not have a building on it. And of course, again, the council has listened to that, respected that, and we are developing Site 8 not as a building site, but as a site for what's going to be some very exciting open space. So I'm pleased to move this. I know there'll be some debate on it, but really this is consistent with council's policies, and we've gone through a consultation process. And I think if you don't support it, it's going to be a bit challenging to say, well, what do you want to do instead? So, yeah, so I move.
And can I just clarify, these amendments are coming through with officer support? Okay. I do have a question of the meaning of them, so can I just ask that now, and then we'll hear the seconder. I'm not clear about the process. So say, so more refining work is being done, is that going to mean any significant change? Because one of the concerns that TAG raised was quite significant around the roof design. So is this going to come back to council? I'm just not entirely comfortable with the process. But the point is it's not coming back to us. And so, for example, I am interested in the height of this building. It is one of the key concerns. So, are you going to bring it back so that's the question, are you going to bring it back if there are changes? And I think it should. You'll bring it back. Councillor Foster, would you mind if we amended that to say that if there are material changes, it will be returned to council? before final sign-off?
Who determines material? I guess the issue.
Well,
I think
I hope you will exercise your best judgment.
I think Iona, the key point is if you have a look at what TAG's actually expressed concerns about, the major concern they've expressed is about the design of that southern end, and they also expressed some concern about whether the building would be able to be used for residential use in terms of the design. Now, I think we got advice this morning that said actually that's the latter of those is probably not an issue, and the other one is not about height; it's about the modulation of the building as it faces shed 13. So I don't think you're likely to see it come back in any way in terms of there being any significant changes. And everybody's shaking their heads too. So,
okay.
So I don't think there's a need to do that.
I'll keep you honest, Councillor Foster, on that particular point. I will be following up. Right. Any other questions? Right. Mayor Lester, do you want to second?
Yes, very happy to. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to start out by saying, thank you to all the staff that have been involved, to Willis Bond, to the submitters, and all the good work that's gone on. Look, we do have the best waterfront in the world, like actually in the world, I think. And people tell me, oh, look, San Francisco's quite nice, Hong Kong by night, it's good. So I privately funded my own trip to San Francisco just to check it out, and sure, it's okay. It's quite good, but we have the best waterfront in the world. So let's start with that premise. Toronto recently, they were over in Auckland presenting to them about what waterfronts could look like. So likewise, I funded a trip over there and stayed in an apartment on their waterfront. And again, it was quite nice, if you like, 25-storey apartment buildings, completely blocked off to the public with very little public access. We have far and away a superior waterfront. And that's because we've had the waterfront framework, we've had that balance. So I do want to commend Waterfront Watch and those who are involved from the outset to make sure that balance was provided. What's impressed me here is there's been a good level of public support. Now, I wouldn't expect that on a waterfront project. Normally it's largely negative, or at least 60 to 70% opposed and 30 to 40% in favour. On this project, we've seen strong levels of public support because they see this as a balanced project. The concerns were around height, which have now been sought to be addressed, and the other concern was around public use or a building use. And as we'd seen through the waterfront framework and through the Environment Court decision, it's been determined and always anticipated under the framework that this would be a building. So what about the checks and balances? Well, as mentioned, we've got the framework. We had a public tender process in 2013. I sat in on that because I was a board member of the Wellington Waterfront Limited then. We had about 7 or 8 proposals. This was by far the best. There were public calls for less commercial projects, I think you'd term it, your sort of public uses of the space as well. There was a children's hotel that was proposed, there was a shipwreck museum. They didn't get across the line because financially they couldn't stack up. Again, this was the best proposal. We've been through the Environment Court. We had consideration there. They also deemed and specified some heights, but they said that this should be a building. We had TAG approval. So TAG is some of the preeminent architects within the city. Why do we have TAG in place? Because the waterfront is so special that we actually go through an extensive design process to make sure that any design complies with what is good for the city. We've had our CSC consideration on the consultation, we've had our public consultation, now we've got a decision today. Are there any red flags in all of that? Some issues have been raised and almost all of them have now been satisfied. We've got the appropriate balance. Financially it works for us, and let's remember that as well. Financially it works for us to help pay for the public space to keep improving the waterfront. Is it consistent with our framework? Yes, it is. So I see no reason why we shouldn't here today congratulate those involved in the project, let them get on with it, and look forward to being completed. Thank you.
Thank you. Who else would like to speak? Councillor Freed.
Yes, I'm going to support this project. You know, it's always a hard one when it comes to the use of public space and buildings, but I don't actually think buildings are always negative. They can be positive, and I'm really heartened that there's a covered walkway, has been well thought through. I think it's quite an asset actually to be able to walk on a rainy day up the waterfront and not get completely saturated. I do have an understanding from listening to submitters that those who were against it, it was in many cases because of the height, and I feel satisfied that that's been addressed, and also that the view shaft, which I feel very strongly about, that the view shaft has actually been cleared again. That's quite important to me. And public space in Site 8, I just want to take the opportunity to thank whoever has been involved many people probably, but I had the pleasure of going with a representative of Living Streets to meet with Mr. Faherty to look at the plans, and they're hard to satisfy sometimes when it comes to pedestrian access and walkability, but actually this particular representative was almost purring because she really liked what she saw. So that was really good to know, and you know, I think it's going to look fabulous. To get that investment in the public space, we do have to make, you know, we have to fund it somehow. So you know, we'll talk about the commercial terms, but I'm actually quite comfortable with those two. So I do like Councillor Day's suggestion about green walls. I'd just like to put in a little plug for that. If there are some finer design details, maybe there could be an experiment somewhere, but I'm happy to support this.
Thank you. Councillor Calvert.
Well, I have actually strong concerns about this project, and I know we've been out for consultation. I'm concerned about the rush of this coming before us right here and now. We know that TAG are still to resolve the design, and it hasn't been made clear to us why this paper couldn't have waited. So we've got the paper this morning, then we're determining it in council following this meeting, all on the same day. We've had our briefing this morning, or essentially the questions. So I have concerns about why this is all being rushed through in a morning. The other aspect to this is that part of it is public excluded in terms of the commercial terms, and really for the public to have a say, they need to understand what those commercial terms are, because if we don't disclose that, how do we open up more creative opportunities for the space? So I believe that if we are excluding the commercial terms from the public, this is impacting on the outcome of our decision. I know previously in CSC I voted for those commercial terms to be public excluded, but I disagree with that now. And all I'm saying is two wrongs don't make a right. So I can't support the information being public excluded. I thought it was interesting, Willis Bond mentioned about flexible and how we can be flexible with the design and how things have changed. And I think things have changed. I mean, we've heard a number of people talk about the history of the waterfront and the history of the site, and even the Wellington waterfront framework that was developed in April 2001 and apparently confirmed in the last council term. But like most things, and I'm looking at a picture of some very fresh-faced people in 2001, including my colleague, Andy Foster, things change, fashions change, and we don't all look the same.
Some of us change.
You know, the genes change. And so, just like the fashions of the time, things have moved on. And I think that's now is the opportunity to actually start thinking about things differently. Yes, we've got 5 new councillors who haven't been aware of all the past history, but I think we can actually bring some fresh thinking to this as well. I think the earthquake has given us further opportunities. We have a new project kicking off, Our City Tomorrow. Now, the waterfront is a prime spot and a key part of our city and this project. Why are we now determining what's going to happen to the last available site on our waterfront? And look, I drive past that site most days, and I do see, and I've been looking at that view shaft, and I think when that building goes up, that view shaft is actually really going to be reduced. So with that, I really can't support this. I would much prefer this had not come to us at this stage, in particular before TAG had made the determination. And also, I would have much preferred that the commercial terms had been released so that the public could have a say and as part of a fully integrated package. Because what we're doing is a very piecemeal approach.
Thank you. Councillor Wolf.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I could go either way on this. One of the things that I've been tremendously hot on over the last year, 18 months, once I learnt the process, was that sometimes we don't get it right in regards to process. And I actually believe that, you know, the fact that the papers only came out on Friday, and sure, there's 2 days statutory, and the fact that they didn't hit the website until Monday is inherently unfair on the public to be able to actually get themselves sorted, as Mr Davies said, and arrange themselves to be able to not just publicly present, but also to investigate and become more informed. And that doesn't just go for the public, it goes for councillors as well, and it's been referred to this morning. The Mayor was very eloquent earlier in respect of the waterfront being the absolute best in the world, and I agree with him, and it was endorsed over the weekend with so many visitors here for the Asia Pacific Golfing Tournament. They were amazed at Wellington and how the waterfront was so accessible. I think that one of the good things that is happening with this is that Willis Bond are taking this to the Environment Court, so there is a protection there at this stage. I'm going to listen to the rest of the debate and also the debate that continues on in public excluded, and just gain a further understanding, particularly as why we're rushing this. I don't understand why things are happening so quickly, other than the fact that we have had advance warning through various different stages as to some of what is occurring, but we haven't had the finer detail in enough time. So I support Councillor Calvert in a lot of what she has said also. I think it's very, very relevant. I think that we need to take note of timing, and we need to give people that fair and reasonable time to assess. So I'll leave it there and possibly come back in the council meeting.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right, well I will then, because I've got quite a lot to say on this particular topic. So, yeah, I'm not going to be talking for too long though. I'll be succinct. So look, I'd like to thank members of the public for their contribution, the developer, Waterfront Watch officers. In fact, I have in a slightly difficult position. As I was walking around my community last night trick-or-treating, I ran into 2 of the main protagonists in this debate. So we have diverse views in our community about what should of course happen to our backyard. There is a long history of disagreement and debate on this waterfront, and that debate, in a sense, is what made it what it is. If the council had had its way, numerous times we would have had walls of buildings and enormous privatisation. It has been, and I want to pay tribute to Waterfront Watch, who time and time again went to the court and said, no, this is public space, or we need to retain heritage values. You truly are the champions of good public process and heritage preservation in this city. Councillor Foster mentioned the framework, which I slightly exasperated by. It's like the Bible. It just depends what you want out of it. It was a compromise document right from the beginning. A little bit shorter. But Councillor Foster, I'm surprised that you didn't make it as long as the Bible, given your propensity to write a lot. You know, if you like public open space, well, you'll find support in there. And if you like buildings, well, you'll also find it there. And that's why we continue to have these arguments. You know, at heart, the question is, what is the purpose of our waterfront? And that's where the disagreement starts. And I have been consistent now. In fact, I was a Waterfront Watch committee member before I was elected. that is public space for the whole of the public to enjoy in perpetuity. Nevertheless, there has been a differing view from Council over the years, and it has been seen that we need the commercial proceeds to pay for the public space. My preference would have been to have funded it from the ratepayer purse. Councillor Calvert, thank you for raising the point around the commercial terms. The commercial terms are at issue here, and I think it would have been better to have had them as part of the debate. However, I am pleased that they will be released at some point, so thank you, colleagues, for supporting my amendment in that point, at that level. Councillor Calvert, you also made the point around that things do change, and certainly they have. In 2001, we did not anticipate the huge numbers of people living in the inner city and wanting to come here. We need that open space. We don't have enough, and this is key space that could be used to meet the needs not just of the inner city population but of the much wider Wellington community. I'm not anti-development. In fact, I think lots of space should be built on. I can't wait to see the Michael Fowler car park, for example, being developed. But we need to keep some public spaces clear, spaces which are precious. I mean, we do have some of the best views in the world and they need to be protected. I think submitters have raised some good concerns, so thank you to members of the public around the bulk of the building, the relationship to the wonderful Shed 13, the protection of view shafts, which I'm not satisfied. I do think it looks like a wall. I know I've had disagreement with the developer on that point, but when you go along the quays, here we go, we have a wall again. Now I take the point that that's the way it was in the past, but again, things have changed and we want more open access. I would have actually been prepared to compromise on some kind of building if it had been a public one, and there was some discussion. Councillor Wolfe, you were involved in that some time ago. The design apparently wasn't practicable, but it was quite a wonderful design, and I think that would have answered some of the concerns of the public. We do live in a windy city, and having some shelter, more shelter on the waterfront, would have been really helpful. I do have concerns around the process. As someone who has been on the other side of the fence, going off to the Environment Court is painful for the developer, but it is even worse for the community. You literally do have to go out and raise money through cake stalls to pay for lawyers and expert witnesses. It is very, very demanding, and I don't agree with it, the process. Therefore, I think it should go through the normal process of a resource consent hearing, which is much more accessible to everyone. My question around a Plan B, I think, was well made. I've heard tub thumping from this council that this project, including the flyover, will go ahead, and which of course it did not. We do need to be careful that we do have an alternative, and it seems that we don't really, and I think we need to think about that. My last point that I want to make is that the levels of public support were, said, oh, well, there is this public support. You know what? I think the public is tired and resigned to the fact that every time this council comes around to the table, it will say yes to a building. When have you said no? Whoever has been around the table. Basically, as I said to Waterfront Watch many years ago, the political process will not help you. You have to go to court because that's how you win, and of course that has been the case. So I'm sorry to members of the public who again will probably have to run those cake stalls to raise the many thousands of dollars it will need to yet again have a discussion about what is the purpose of our waterfront. By all means, go forth and develop. There is plenty of opportunity in this city, but this space we need to keep for future generations.
Thank you. There's a few things to respond to. And look, can I also, because I didn't do it in my original speech, is to also echo the thanks that have been directed to both the people who've made submissions, the people who've come this morning, to our officers in putting all the work together that they have done, to Willis Bond and Airfield Architects as well, for your work, not just here, but also for the many other developments, particularly on the waterfront, but not only on the waterfront, because I think they've made a significant difference to our city for the better. In terms of what I was going to respond to, probably the ones I most need to respond to, Diane, Simon and Iona.
Genes.
Sorry?
Is it genes?
The genes. I'm not quite sure what the genes are. Look, Diane, in terms of the process, ideally it would have been a good idea to separate the two meetings. To have the strategy meeting and in our normal way, and I don't know quite why that's not happened. We had a couple of opportunities of having strategy meetings in the last month, one of which got cancelled, so I don't know why that's happened in the way it's done. But we've got what we've got here today, and you've got to make a judgment on what we've got in front of us. The fact, and it's not that complicated a decision. It's not, Shelley Bay, for example, is a considerably more complicated decision. And this one, of course, we've had a lot of the material over a long period of time. We've consulted on it. And the question really is what's changed from what we had there. And the reality is all that's really changed is that the scale of the building has been slightly reduced. And there's been some design issues, some of which are still being worked through. But material, not really. That's just, and certainly in terms of if you're feeling that you don't want to support it, the impacts have actually been reduced rather than increased. So I would have thought that is should be helpful rather than not. You also made the comment that things change, but the reality is we've got to have a reason to change things. You've got to have some purpose of changing things, and the fact is we've gone through the framework process, we've reviewed the framework, the length of time that it's taken to get to this stage with this particular building. If we're going to change things, 3-year terms for council are really, really short. We would need about 6, 7, 8 years to be allowed to have any project like this to start on day one to get it finished within the term of one council. Because these things are always going to cross over councils, and if we want to keep changing things, we are never going to get anything done. So we can't keep changing unless there's a really good reason to change, and I don't see a really good reason to change in this particular situation. In terms of the tag process, look, I think sometimes we've actually got to trust our staff and the people we appoint to do the job, and they are the experts. We are not going to go and design. Who's going to put their hand up and actually go and say, well, I'm an expert designer, I'm going to design the building? Because I don't think it's going to be any of us. So I think we've got to allow the people who we employ to do that job, and we pay to do that job, to do it. And we've said that we want them to do that, and that is now part of the recommendations. Simon, timing again. Look, again, the question is what's changed from, the material, the details of the material, they were all in front of the public not 2 days ago. They were in front of the public, I think it was in April, and they haven't materially changed since then. So if people didn't like the design then, they're probably not going to like it now. They might have been reduced, they might have been persuaded to like it now. But there's not a heck of a lot that has changed from what we had in the consultation or the oral submissions, a month and a half or so ago. So ideally, yes, the papers should be out a couple of days earlier, but they're still meeting the statutory timeframes, and again, there's not anything material that's changed. Iona, the waterfront framework, if you like public space or buildings, you'll find it, yes, you will, but you'll also find it in certain places in the waterfront. It says Frank Kitts Park, for example, is a place which is about open space. It says Waitangi Park is a place which is about open space. It says North Kaumatoto is a place which is about buildings and squares. So you can't mix and match those two together. That's quite clear about those sort of things. And in terms of our city tomorrow, we need more open space. And I would say, yep, I'm going to be very interested to see what our city tomorrow says. And I hope that we do this in a coherent fashion across the CBD as a whole, that we don't make some ad hoc decisions. And I'm thinking of some places in this particular near vicinity. And I would have thought if you wanted to look at park space in the northern part of the city and you look at the seismic risks, etc., I would have thought you start looking at some land owned not by Wellington Waterfront, but by its neighbour, who seems to be in a position where they're going to have to demolish a whole lot of buildings, and I don't imagine they're going to want to be building a lot more of them. So maybe that's the place that we ought to be looking at for some more open space in that area. Or actually the other bit is of course part of the government precinct. And those are actually the more vulnerable bits too of our city. We've seen that, both demonstrated but also that the seismic information says that. And if anybody had a look at that when we were at the Our City Tomorrow, that fantastic sort of 3D virtual reality, amazing stuff. Where's the big red seismic risky bit? North of here. It's on the port and Portland and some of that Thornton land. So that's where I'd be looking if I were you. And finally, in terms of the consent process and Environment Court process, look, I guess the issue here is that if you believe that the consent is going to get appealed to the Environment Court anyway, why go through two processes, which is much, much longer, much more expensive? Why not go straight to the Environment Court? That ability is there in law now, and I think it's quite reasonable that it is taken in this situation, given what's tended to happen in the past. If you disagree with the building, I can't remember. I'll go back and have a look at the vote that we had last training on the review of the framework. But I think it was unanimous that we actually said yes, the framework's fit for purpose. So I'm going to check that, and I'll check it before the council meeting because I have it on here, and I'll just see how you voted. Because if you didn't vote against that, then that was the opportunity. So I think, councillors, there is no reason for us not to support this. It is completely in keeping with our policies. We've been through a consultation process. There's been a response to the consultation, which is to reduce the scale of the building slightly. TAG is doing its job as well, and I think we should just be thankful to all the people who've participated in this and get on with it.
Back to the vote. I haven't had any requests to take anything separately. I'm going to take a division. So all those in favour of the development, can you raise your hands, please? Of the development or the recommendations?
The recommendations.
Right. Councillor Day, Councillor Gilbert, Councillor Free, Councillor Wolfe, Mayor Lester, Councillor Foster, Councillor Dawson, Councillor Marsh, Councillor Young, Councillor Sparrow, Councillor Lee, Councillor Calvi-Freeman, and those opposed, Councillor Pennant and Councillor Calvert. Thank you very much. Right, we are now going to have a discussion about whether we go into public excluded for the second paper. I am going to move it pro forma, even though I don't, in ideal terms, agree with it. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Wolfe. Any debate? Councillor Calvert.
Look, I can't, from the information given by officers, and it's a bit difficult to talk about it because it's all obviously public excluded, but to me this deal is no different to the Shelley Bay. And look, we were able to disclose the terms for that. We put the Wellington company under the spotlight on it. And I don't understand why we are not doing the same for this one, because it's important from a public public information. You know, if it's the right deal, it would stack up. So I support that this is not public excluded because of that.
Any other debate? Yeah, actually, I think that is a reasonable point that you've made. Mr. Batana, Mr. Chick, do you have any view? Why is this different to Shelley Bay? Apart from the historical practice of separating the papers in such a way.
I articulated some reasons to Councillor Calvert this morning in an email as to why the commercial terms should remain confidential, and they are the agreement is still conditional on resource consent and still has a chance of not proceeding. The commercial details of a property transaction are generally not disclosed until after settlement. Secondly, a confidentiality clause in the agreement, a normal requirement of developers when dealing with transactions of this type and nature. And thirdly, the information when published is often misinterpreted due sometimes to selective or only partial reporting of details of the transaction.
Do you wish to ask any other questions?
Can I just make a comment that really all those points, barring the resource consent, are exactly the same as what we had for Shelley Bay?
Dr. Lavery.
That's not the case. The resource consent is obviously completed in the case of Shelley Bay, whereas this hasn't gone through that process.
Councillor Calvert acknowledged that point. It was the other points.
It's fundamentally different because of that.
Do you wish to say anything further? No. Can I I'll just, as right of reply, I think this really, to some extent, is an historical issue because this has always been the way it's been done, so it hasn't been challenged. And now that Shelley Bay has come on stream, I actually think you're raising a really good point, and I think as a result of this, because of the way that Shelley Bay was done, and I was glad that it was open, I think we should ask officers. I'm not going to move an amendment. It's not really appropriate in this particular one. Is that we look at that when we are doing further commercial deals that are going to come before council. I think you're making a good point. No, Councillor Foster, that was the right of reply.
Point of order, Chair. I don't think you invited members to...
Well, I did, but no one was... Yes.
You asked the questions.
No, I did ask for any further contribution. All right, okay, right. Councillor Foster, Councillor Calvi-Freeman.
One other observation of something which obviously is very, very clearly different between this and Shelley Bay. In the situation with Shelley Bay, we were putting significant amount of money or dollars into the arrangement.
Councillor Foster, Councillor Foster, I think we should not go into that point because that's actually debatable and it's not appropriate to raise it now. Councillor Calvi-Freeman.
And that clearly was one of the main issues that many of the submitters actually had.
This is... Right, that would be better to be debated and open. Councillor Calvi-Freeman.
We have a confidentiality agreement signed between the council and the developer, so I don't believe morally or legally we should be breaking that now by going into public on this issue. However, I do think we should send a very strong signal to developers from this point onwards that we shouldn't be entering into such confidentiality agreements and that we should be moving to take as much of our business as we possibly can in open session. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Calvert.
Look, I can't understand if we say it's not good enough going forward, why is it good enough now? If we've got concerns going forward, then, it might well be, to protect the developers, the confidentiality agreement, that this paper gets laid on the table, so conversations and separate off-the-table discussions can be held with the developer before this comes back to us.
The problem is you can put... Right, have you got 75% support? Okay. So you'll second it. Sorry, this has got to be done properly. So you're moving it. Councillor Marsh is seconding. Okay, so all those in favour, you need to raise your hands because it's 75%. If you want to stop debate now. On whether it goes into public excluded. You're not allowed to debate going into public excluded. Okay, so come on, let's putting it to the vote. Okay, keep up. Okay, so that's Councillor Day, Councillor Gilbert, Councillor Free. You've got to record all this. Yep. Councillor Free, Councillor Wolfe, Mayor Lester, Councillor Foster, Councillor Dawson, Councillor Marsh, Councillor Young, Councillor Sparrow, Councillor Lee, Councillor Calvi-Freeman. So it succeeds because it's going over 75. Thank you. Right, so I'm sorry, members of the public, media. Sorry, so now we have to go to the vote that we... Yes, sorry, thank you. Sorry. So all those in favour of going into public excluded, can you raise your hands again, just given it's been a bit difficult? Okay, so that's everyone except for Councillor Calvert. Thank you very much. Right, so yes, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to leave now.
Right, councillors, members of the public, we'll get the council meeting underway. Hopefully it won't take too long. I know some of you have got somewhere else to be. Just a reminder, councillor, that we will be live webcasting the council meeting. I don't have any apologies, councillors. I don't have any announcements either. Are there any conflict of interest declarations? Nope. We'll move to confirm the minutes. I'll put them, the minutes which have been circulated as part of the report from the 30th September 2017. I'll move. Councillor Free, have a second. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? I declare those recommendations carried. We don't have any public participation for today's meeting, so I'd like to invite Councillor Day to introduce Report 2.1.
Okay, so this report is regarding the by-election for the Southern Ward, which will be occurring leading up to Christmas. So we are recommending here today that this is to agree to the random order on the voting documents. So that's that the order varies from paper to paper, and this is very straightforward. We understand how this works, so I recommend that we move this.
Have a second. Councillor Kelly Freeman. Debate. Councillor Young.
Very briefly, that some of you who have names higher in the alphabet may not understand the significance of your position on the ballot paper, but having the, dare I call it, a maiden name of Young, I think it's a very good idea. I spent my whole life at the end of the queue, either because I was the tallest, or in my family I was the youngest, second to youngest, she didn't count, or at school when I was the youngest, and now I've gone back to my maiden name. I applaud the idea of having random name order.
Councillor Sparrow. Okay, this could go on.
Just very briefly, Your Worship, I recall hearing a few trienniums back that when this matter was discussed, Councillor Armstrong was very much opposed to it and Councillor Wayne was very much in favour.
And as a result, I think Councillor Wayne was elected and Councillor Armstrong wasn't. Yeah. These things have repercussions. We'll now move. Councillor Kelly Freeman wishes to speak as well.
Your Worship, this is an absolute no-brainer, but the only thing I was just going to express a little bit of surprise about is the fact that the cost of printing would be the same. And surely the randomisation for every ballot paper is going to drive up the costs, perhaps one of the officers could allay my fears on that.
Fears have been allayed.
Okay.
There are no additional costs. Modern technology reigns supreme. But thank you for your concern, Councillor Kelly Freeman. The recommendation's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? We don't have anyone starting with A. We'll now move to Report 2.2. On page 11, there are a number of changes here which I'm happy to move. I just want to point out recommendation 5 has been crossed out. Councillor Day, Deputy Mayor Day, is already on the group and doesn't need to be appointed as well, as she sits there as the alternate. I do want to note, Councillor Wolf, I want to thank you for your work on the Basin Reserve Trust, and due to your extensive other requirements, we've got Councillor Marsh who's going to go in there as your replacement. Otherwise, I thank you, councillors, for the discussions which have led to these appointments. You'll all do a good job, I'm confident and sure of. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Young, get you to second. All those in favour? Is there any debate? No, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? I declare those recommendations carried. Now move to report 3.1. We'll take 3.1 and 3.2 together. Councillor Foster, do you want to introduce those?
Do that. We've already had an extensive debate, but I have researched the one thing that I did want to find out, and that is what happened when we did the review back in 2011. I've now found it, and actually the paper was moved by Councillor Pannett, seconded by Mayor Wade Brown, and I have no record that anybody voted against it. So I move the report.
Ooh, critical and highly pressed. And I sense a response or a seconding from the facts don't lie. I'd like to point out, councillors, the facts will never lie. Councillor Pannett, I look forward to your forthcoming praise of the waterfront framework. Do we have a seconder? I'm happy to second Councillor Pannett on debate.
Well, councillors, actually facts do sometimes lie, or the administrators get things wrong. Because if, as we looked at the minutes
Point of order, because that is suggesting that when the minutes were also approved that they were still wrong and Councillor Pannett didn't pick it up.
or yourself,
Councillor Pannett,
Foster.
there's been a point of order raised on misrepresentation. Absolutely, Councillor Foster is correct. And if we check the minutes and the confirmation of the minutes, I suspect we'll also find you having supported the minutes. Point of order is
but
clear.
to be serious, you know, the Shelley Bay ones were actually incorrect, so we did have to change them. They didn't report the division, so it looked like we'd all agreed to Shelley Bay, when of course the vote was actually quite tight. So don't. I've been around here long enough, Councillor Foster. I wouldn't always expect that elected members, including yourself, check all of the details of the minutes. And I certainly was not happy with the outcome of the review of the framework, but it was no surprise to me that this council would even begin to think about whether it was still fit for purpose.
Right of reply?
I can't resist that because obviously this council, the previous council, not before that one, did think it was worth having a look, did have a look, and took about 5 or 6 months of a bit of work got done, and then came back and actually said, no, actually we do think it's fit for purpose. And yes, I would expect chairs to always check the minutes. Maybe the rest of the council might not check them as well, as avidly, but I know that I've often pointed out to officers where things have been made, where mistakes have been made in various committee papers, including those ones which I haven't chaired.
We'll now move, we'll vote on both reports, on reports 3.1 and 3.2, unless there's any exception to that. Okay. The recommendation's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? And like your votes recorded, Councillor Pannett and Councillor Calvert. Record those votes of dissent. I declare the recommendations carried. Now we're going to have to move into public excluded. So pursuant to the requirements of the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act 1987 and clauses 4.1 and 4.2, I move that we move into public excluded. All those in favour, please. Sorry, seconder first. Councillor Day, Councillor Pannett.
I'm actually going to vote against this one. I didn't vote on the last time, but I actually don't see, given what's being discussed, I actually think that we are being overly cautious and it should be done in public.
I'm talking.
We're on to the next paper.
Yeah, we've got two papers. Two papers.
Well, I'm not even not even clear if I'm allowed to say which one it was. Yes. So it is the first paper, 4.1, that I object to.
I will move into debate. I tend to agree with Councillor Pannett. I'm again not sure why this should be in public excluded, so I'm happy to have the debate in public. In relation to 4.1, Councillor Calvert, you wish to speak? I don't want extensive debate on this. If we put it to a vote. Councillor Calvert? So we're talking about report 4.1. I won't go into the title because it is public excluded currently. I'm on the same page as Councillor Pannett. I don't see why this couldn't be considered public. Councillor Wolfe? I don't personally know. Councillor Foster?
Unless an officer is willing to give some advice, and maybe the Chief Executive should, the usual situation for, in fact, ever since I've been on council has been that where an appointee is not a member of the council, or a prospective appointee is not a member of the council, then it goes into PE. The simple reason for that is that if we start saying that Mr. Smith is somebody doesn't like Mr. Smith and starts talking about them, you know, that's splashed all over the media. That's not fair to them. So that's the reason we go into PE for these processes. So I would appreciate some advice from the Chief Executive if there is any reason we shouldn't follow what has been the long-standing practice of the Council.
Sorry, can I just ask a question? I do tend to agree with Councillor Foster, although because it has been the long-standing tradition, and I don't think it's fair then to switch it now. Although, again, I think we should look at it. I think we're being overly precious. But what I would like to ask for some advice is whether we can split it, because there is one issue which I think should be debated publicly, which I think is absolutely unproblematic, and I hope we all are clear which the issue is.
No, we can't split it. We can't split it between public and public excluded. Technically, I don't think that's possible. So we have to make a decision either way. Andy, any comment in terms of why this needs to be public excluded specifically? Report 4.1. Okay, we'll put it to a vote. All those in favour of taking the public excluded, please raise your hand. Against? Wish your vote recorded? Councillor Calvert, record that vote. Okay, we'll now move into public excluded for the next two reports. Thank you to members of the public. Thank you to the journalists, budding journalist students for being here as well. Good luck in your future careers. This will no doubt be the highlight of said careers. I hope not. As it is on a daily basis, both for George and